Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Florence Sumere. I'm the VP of Marketing Communications for the Ethics and Compliance Initiative. And I want to thank you for joining us for this ECI live event, which is positioning ENC as a strategic leader in times of stress or crisis. And in this virtual environment, we'd like to learn more about you and where you're joining us from. So I know that Alyssa has put that in the chat, but we would love for you to just post where you're joining us from. So good afternoon, good evening, and excited for all of you to join us. So I just want to give some context around this webinar today. So in the fall of 2020, when the coronavirus was at its peak, we convened this working group to explore how ENC professionals could be strategic leaders in times of stress and crisis. So, in addition to the pandemic, other stressors considered in this working group paper were mergers and acquisitions, regulatory legal actions against a company, impact of penalties and monitoring, and organizational structural changes within an organization. So today we have four of the working group members here on this webinar. They include Daniel Brady from US Bank Corp, Robin Romer from KPMG, Susan Matheson from Ethically Intelligent, and Wendy Evans from Lockheed Martin. So anyway, thank you so much for participating in this working group and presenting this paper. I know during these times it's perfectly, fine to have, this webinar, and excited to have all of you here with us. Wendy?
Thank you so very much for that nice introduction, Florence. And we are thrilled to be joining you today for ECI Live. And today we are thrilled to be presenting our working group paper results on positioning, ethics, and compliance as a strategic leader in times of stress or crisis. And we all know we've been through quite a bit in the last couple of years. And any one of the topics you're about to hear today would probably be a working group paper in and of itself. But we took the whole of the kind of stresses that could impact you in your roles as an ethics and compliance professional. And we hope that you take away today even one or two tips that might help you. On our screen, you can see some of the working group participants. Now, I will say by accident, I left out Jenny Jackson. So her name would be one that would be added to this distinguished list. Sundar, Daniel, Robin, Nadine, Sherry, Mike, Suzanne, Kalwant, and James all participated in helping our leads with this project. So we have prepared a working group paper, and the paper has been made available through the ECI site. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. If you haven't, please go download it and check it out. It goes into a lot of detail, far more than we could go into, obviously, in the next 50 minutes or so. So we hope that you check that out. What you'll see are in the next 50 minutes or so, we will have presentations on how we divided this paper. We divided it into internal factors, factors within our organizations that cause some stress and crises and how we respond. We also looked at external factors, arguably those opportunities or challenges over which we may not have as much control as we do internally, right? So we looked at that. And then we're so excited to present today. And I already see Suzanne grinning. If you all can't tell, she is going to walk us through a toolkit that we developed just for you, taking kind of a different approach to the working group paper to say, what tool could we provide you? So that's what we're hoping to do here. To get started, it's probably good if we're kind of in consensus about the terminology. What do we mean by stress? Well, we are talking about mental, physical, or emotional responses to actual or even perceived environmental conditions. And when we talk about crisis, our working group discussed that that's really a time of intense challenge when important or difficult decisions have to be made in response to the circumstances or environment in which we find ourselves. So we thought it might be good just to start with that so that you know kind of the premise that we started from in looking at the impact on our organizations. So, stresses and pressure, not an all inclusive slide. I'm sure some of you are already sitting out there thinking of other terms you would add, but let's look at the left first, the world. Um, it all became very real to us, didn't it, with the global pandemic, which is still going on. We're hoping that through vaccinations and time that we are seeing kind of a fading into perhaps less dangerous strains of COVID-19. But we've had the pandemic. That's kind of been the elephant in the room, one of the bigger reasons that we started this working group. Obviously, that was a big stressor we were all dealing with. But there are other environmental concerns. All of us have had to deal with issues like remediation, or perhaps there's been flooding, heavy rains, warming, global warming, travel impacts to all of us due to the pandemic or even world events. We have the situation in Ukraine. Our world globally has many conflicts, political elections, even wars that go on, political unrest, social unrest, climate change, as we mentioned, global warming, and other issues that are all important as we look at ESG in our company.
Looks like Wendy's got a little technical glitch. There she should be coming
No,
back in a
that's
moment.
me. Robin, do you mind, or Suzanne, if you could take over for a bit until we get her back?
Sure. We'll move on to the next slide. Oh, there's Wendy. Go ahead.
Sorry, I came back. I apologize. Not sure what happened there. But I did want to just note that, internal pressures could be legal challenges or updates, media interest in our organization. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes perhaps not as good. Leadership or organizational changes, cultural change, staffing challenges, new or sunset products, and divestiture or closings, mergers and acquisitions. As we go through our presentation, you will also be learning about how our working group applied the HQP, so high quality ethics and compliance program principles, to our research and our work. Today, these are the folks that you're going to be hearing from. Robin is going to start us off with internal factors, and then we'll have Dan Brady joining us sort of virtually, and Suzanne talking about our toolkit. So with that, Robin, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you. So yes, thanks, Wendy, for introducing and getting us kicked off. I'm so glad to finally present this working group paper to our E&C colleagues, our internal stress factors working group, which it'd be great if we could have a shorter name, but the internal stress factors team has been working very hard for about a year and a half, almost a year and a half. We've worked together, and I'm thankful for their willingness to participate in weekly working, editing, and revision sessions. I want to first thank my co-lead, Nadine Mello, she's from Lockheed Martin, Elizabeth Simon with First Key Homes, Jenny Jackson from Lockheed, James Middleton, who's an E&C practitioner and author based out of England, and Suzanne Matheson, who Wendy introduced, who'll be with ethicallyintelligent.org. She'll also be presenting today. So when we began our work, I will say we were overwhelmed. The topic was so broad, and there were so many factors to consider. All of our organizations were dealing with many competing stress factors. Also, candidly, our group was not routinely involved in key strategic decisions for our organizations. We decided, though, not to focus on these past experiences whereby an E&C professional may only be brought in at the end of a strategic change or a crisis. And in a lot of cases, they're there to kind of clean things up. We decided our premise was to build a roadmap to a more embedded E&C presence, utilizing the business acumen we all possessed. As E&C professionals, we decided we had the skill sets. We communicate, we train, we develop policies, we investigate, we question, we mitigate, we mediate, we resolve, we measure, and we definitely know when a plan is not well executed. Therefore, our internal team focused on two key questions. Where does the ethics and compliance professional fit in, and how best can we contribute? The source of the internal stress factors may be the result of a well-planned strategic change, such as a lot of the ones that Wendy mentioned before, shifts in future business plans, modifications to product strategies or mix, formations of new company alliances and partnerships. You might have a shakeup in your board or company leadership. And we're always going through reassessments of employee staffing levels and skill sets. And of course, we become all too familiar with the term, the new ways of working. Stress could also be the result of something that you do plan for, but is also unexpected, such as a cyber threat. It's always considered, but you never know when potentially it will hit. Regardless of the impetus, such events can increase apprehension among the employee base, leadership, the organization's stakeholders, and even our customers. Our working group, though, decided to take a less reactionary view of the impending internal changes. Rather than waiting for that proverbial dust to settle, we started with the premise that organizational leaders should consider a careful and targeted communication strategy throughout the life cycle of the change, whatever it is, from planning to execution to evaluation. And our group also admitted that it's usually the evaluation phase where we all fall short. We might have had a very good plan and execute on it, but did we take the time to evaluate if we were successful? What were the pitfalls? And then conversely, maybe we had to respond in the moment and we're in a reactionary stage, but maybe we executed that well, and we need to recognize the success is there, and also how we can plan going forward to not be in a reactionary mode again. So where did we go for guidance in these questions? We didn't really have to look far because, as Wendy mentioned, we have the ECI's high quality program. Principle 2 in particular, regarding risk management, focused on supporting and guiding employees based upon specific roles. And using this principle as a starting point, we found that the internal stress factors provide actually a great opportunity for the ethics and compliance professional to fulfill this objective, not just based on the employee's roles, but based upon the changes initiated by or even forced upon the organizations. The framework really expands the E&C professional's role to include guidance to the organization about the upcoming changes. We could recommend targeted communication channels. We can review the post-case environment and evaluate how well we did to meet the benchmarks. And of course, we can adjust and revise policies and training and future reporting mechanisms. So what does this really look like on the ground rather than just the theoretical? We came up with a lot of ideas for the working group paper, but I'll just share a couple of ideas which bubbled up. One related to cyber threat planning and the other related to acquisitions. Two very diverse crises and points of stress. One, again, as I previously stated, is expected, but you never know when it will happen. And then, of course, acquisitions, which is it's a longer term issue. So as to cyber threat planning, much has been written about operational resilience and the need for companies to develop business continuity plans. And such plans really typically focus on the data, the software, the process, the hardware recovery. But very few really deal with the human side of the equation. What are employees supposed to do when a cyber threat occurs? How is the organization taking care of its employees? Are there sufficient communication channels to provide guidance on next steps and timelines? Are employees expected to stand down for a time to allow the technical teams to assess the risk and mitigate? Are employees being given sufficient resources and support? So although operational resilience really gets to the point of being able to plan for such crises, it needs to go beyond the hardware and the software and really speak to the personnel resilience as well as the operational resilience. On the flip side, acquisitions are typically longer term in planning and execution. But we all know that acquisitions are not just a legal transaction. They create anxieties of a different kind. Employees may be concerned about culture changes because one entity and most likely both will change as far as their business model and those cultural changes. So to research that topic further, we reviewed a McKinsey survey of more than 3,100 employees that found even seemingly minor changes during an acquisition process, such as security badge changes, expense policy changes, time policy changes, and even cafeteria plans create disruptions and feeling of loss regarding the old entities. And McKinsey suggested that employers during these times of change actively monitor the culture and adjust to align over time, regularly measure and understand the perceptions of the employees, and use that feedback to tailor activities and accelerate their impact. So using McKinsey's suggestions, our team determined that we could incorporate a lot of what we already do as E&C professionals. Perhaps companies can set up a targeted hotline or reporting channel in anticipation of the announced acquisition for both entities. An employee from either organization may feel more comfortable reaching out to this specific channel rather than a general hotline, for example, or their new manager for the new organization. Employees may not understand how the process will work in the end, but knowing that they have a reporting channel specific to their concerns during the acquisition and a way to express confusion, seek clarity, either being identified or anonymously, I think would go a long way to fulfilling the need to provide a reporting channel for employees through these times of change. You may also decide to conduct pulse surveys at key points in time after the company announcement, midway through the acquisition process, and post-completion. These surveys should allow the employees to communicate their understanding of the impending changes, their levels of concerns, areas of confusion, and potentially opportunity to provide feedback. These data points, most importantly, could provide invaluable information about the need for more training, more communications. Maybe we thought we communicated the expense policy well, but we're finding out through that feedback that we have not. So our white paper does delve more deeply into other major internal changes. I've only highlighted a couple, but as we all know, there are a lot of stress factors out there. But we wanted to provide recommendations to expand the E&C professional's role to be more strategic and, more importantly, embedded. We really look forward to your review of our working group paper and welcome your feedback. So now you'll hear from the external factors team. Dan Brady was not able to join us for the event, but we are so grateful that he agreed to share a video outlining their team's work. Thank you again for your time.
Dan Brady with US Bank's Global Ethics Office, and I was part of the working group that focused on external factors. And we examined several external stressors or potential sources of crises to include economic factors, world events and natural disasters, negative media attention, and litigation or government investigations. And since 2020, it's been difficult to choose just one of one or two examples to focus on with the events that seem to happen, but that's really kind of the challenge. And the question central to this is, how does ethics and compliance adapt and remain a source of truth and good business practice in spite of this rapidly changing landscape? So each of those factors that I mentioned contains its own unique nuance and its unique situation, as does each crisis. But in general, some themes emerge. The first one was that the concept that ethics and compliance really has an obligation to continue the mission. And while being adaptable, we still need to not necessarily get caught up in the heat of the moment and compliance and ethics still needs to be something we steadily pursue. Another theme, and one that really played a large role in what we were looking at, was the organization that is best positioned to successfully navigate a crisis if it has a strong ethical foundation. So if it's known to act with integrity, if it's built trust with its customers, and almost more importantly, its employees, those organizations really were able to respond in an authentic way that people believed or subscribed to, and help them really start to climb out of a crisis. And ethics and compliance functions play a critical role in doing just that, in building transparency and helping people understand that they operate, come to them from a position of trust. And the third theme really was about driving the message of speak up. I don't think that can be underrated, but overrated, I should say, but encouraging employees to raise issues, to respond when they do, that still remains a critical component on either side of the crisis. So communication definitely played a key role as far as that goes. And that's about it.
And it's back to me, and I want to apologize. I'm going to flash through some slides. You don't see a thing while I get to the one I want. We're all getting used to this platform, but we rather like it. So I did want to just spend a minute. Dan was great to have recorded that for us so that he could still be with you and present on behalf of he and Sundar of our external factors team. In the working group paper, and again, we're going to post some links. It's on the ECI site if you want to find it there. It goes into way more detail, but we talked about economic downturns. Just as Robin mentioned, the importance of a helpline or a hotline for anonymous or even identified reporting is so important. That may be the only way someone works up the courage to get in touch with you if it's an anonymous means. Reorganizing spends and an optimal approach to ethics and compliance. In other words, those partnering capabilities and sharing became so important during times of crisis. The group explored world events, natural disasters, as we talked about earlier, and reassessing risk can be so important. Sometimes during times of crisis, your risk picture becomes completely different. Priorities change, and the organization has to be agile. Hopefully, for instance, if it's a natural disaster, there are business continuity plans. And I think for those of us who have been through such crisis, there's always a good practice to review your business continuity plans regularly. Hindsight's 2020. After an incident, yes, we often tend to make corrections because we learn, right? But it's good to be anticipating and reassessing those risks regularly and thinking about the what ifs. How would our risk picture change in the face of crisis? Collaborating with our stakeholders to ensure the voice is there for ethics and compliance. Getting into those meetings now, requesting a seat at the table, reaching out and establishing those relationships or strengthening the ones that are already there. Social events, sometimes there's negative publicity, as we talked about. Products could fail. It's happened. And there we are, perhaps on a news story or having to defend a product or a service where there was an issue that came up. Driving that culture again, having a helpline, bringing clarity through working with your communications folks, ideally, or your other stakeholders to come up with a company statement. Again, it's good to have those processes in place before you need to avail yourself of those contacts in a crisis. Proactive investigations, keeping your finger on the pulse and taking those helpline calls or taking the information that comes into the ethics compliance office and actioning them, whether that's a guidance, whether it's connecting the person who contacted you with the right entity at your organization, or whether it's conducting an investigation and being transparent with the results of that investigation and making sure a remediation or corrective actions are taken are so important, because they can actually have you more prepared for a crisis and then able to operate within the crisis. Government regulatory oversight investigations. Again, this comes into your risk analysis and working with regulatory entities to understand what your company's obligations are. Working with your leadership, working with legal to make sure that your policies and protocols are in line with those regulations, and that there is maybe even a tabletop or a way to discuss how do you handle a crisis where your networks are down. For example, if your company has classified information or sensitive information, how will you deal with that? And how will you reassure stakeholders of your preparation and actions you're taking in the middle of crisis? So with that, I just wanted to follow up on those external factors. So at this point, I am going to introduce to you Suzanne, who is going to walk us through her toolkit. Suzanne, over to you.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and good afternoon, good day to everybody wherever you're located. See, my camera's being a little weird again. Let's see if we can get that to come right back up. There we go. Good afternoon and good morning, wherever you guys are from. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar today. We're really excited to show you this part of the project. And before we dive into the toolkit itself, I'm going to let you take a look at this little teaser, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background on as to how this companion to this working group paper came about. A little over a year and a half ago, when I had the opportunity to join my fellow working group team members in this project, I brought with me my many years of experiences in studying and teaching about the impacts of stress from a holistic wellness root cause perspective. Now, to be clear, stress is not all bad. In some cases, it's even beneficial. However, its multi-layered adverse effects that chronic workplace stress and pressure have upon human physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being that makes it a global health concern in our volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times. About 10 years ago, I began being contracted by training companies to teach mindfulness courses to corporate employees that were intended to have them manage or reduce, and I do those little air quotes on purpose, their stress. However, privately, my students were telling me that while these practices were really beneficial in helping them soothe the symptoms of their stress in the moment, the bigger problem that they were experiencing was that their managers, their leaders, and a debilitating workplace culture in which they had no power to safely speak up about or change anything kept them kind of dog paddling through their workday. And often they brought their stressors home where they'd be acted out upon their loved ones. And every day they still have to spend 8 hours or more in an environment that was making them miserable and unwell. And I can tell you there were a lot of retaliatory fantasies shared with me by frustrated employees who were getting yelled at by their managers for even taking an hour a week to take the course that their own company had brought them in to help them manage their stress. So I realized after a bit of time that what I was doing was putting what I call Band-Aids or metastasizing cancers. Unfortunately, I was not allowed to address the internal root causes that were resulting in employees often suffering in silence. I saw that reducing an employee's workplace stress right on their shoulders was not going to really respect them. And respect probably the most, what I call the most important resource is our human resource. And I also began to see that unaddressed or improperly addressed stress is an organizational ethical risk as well. Needless to say, I was thrilled that ECI had the foresight to take this working group project on, prompted by the global disruptive stress and chaos experienced from the COVID-19 pandemic. During one of our first working group meetings, I brought up all the above to our team, and immediately this was underscored by my fellow team member, Kalwan Dinsa, a compliance officer who is also educated and experienced in facilitating workplace well-being, stress resiliency. She has spent countless hours helping fellow compliance professionals calm their symptoms of chronic workplace stress when root causes were not being properly addressed. Both of us believe that the myriad damaging effects of chronic workplace stress and pressure had to be a component of this working group paper and must include what we consider the elephant in the middle of the room impacts of toxic workplace culture and leadership. Thankfully, the entire the entire team agreed that this needed to be a part of the project. However, very early on, we realized that adding a toolkit section to the white paper itself would be unwieldy. We are grateful that ECI supported CalWAT and myself in building a companion website that offers both educational awareness as well as actionable synergistic skills to build both human and organizational resilience before the next major crisis catches them off guard, and also to skillfully address everyday workplace stress. And so now here we are in 2021, and what we have been working on in the past year and a half and published in our working group paper and throughout the Toolkit website is being acknowledged everywhere with the Great Resignation. A recent paper published by MIT acknowledged that the number one reason given for leaving a job is what the Toolkit's Tackling Root Causes approach acknowledges, a growing refusal to work in a toxic workplace culture. Yet a toolkit is only valuable if all the tools are implemented and used together when tackling a big job like workplace stressors and not choosing just one or two. To be fully prepared, an organization must build readiness, responsiveness, and resiliency systems, processes, and skills now, effectively, and not just put it on an aspirations list or use check-the-box training programs that don't really move the needle and keep them stuck in that old status quo of doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results, which, by the way, Einstein never really actually said that. By working to ensure that organizations have a workplace culture of integrity, which by its very definition is whole, unbroken, and harmonious. And you either have it or you don't. E&C professionals are leaders who can help navigate the rough waters during times of stress and crisis and use their skills to guide all stakeholders through to the other side and not just survive the next incident, but actually learn from each challenging event and emerge stronger together. So let's go take a look at the website itself. Okay. So this is the beginning of the site, and we come in, right off the bat, we begin with the question of the fact that unaddressed workplace stress is an ethical risk in terms of, like I said, when I had employees telling me their fantasies of how they wanted to retaliate for the things that they couldn't have control over, these are problems. And as you see, they can have a damaging effect in the organization. So we start out with a little bit of information about that in general and why that's important. And one of the first things we dive into is, well, why aren't many organizations taking this seriously? And of course, a lot of fear of change is involved. And we have the beginning of this paper starting to talk about why risks are avoided. And we have throughout the paper numerous professionals in different fields that are addressing these issues. And this one begins to actually talk about that problem of stress in and of itself and why it's not handled as importantly as it needs to be. And one of the things that we found with the COVID pandemic was that the silver lining that was contained within all of this chaos was the need to really understand taking into serious effect the impacts of stress on mental health and to begin to remove that stigma from how it's spoken about in an organization. And so as we began doing that, we began to pull together our resources. And this is what the toolkit will all show you, different types of data and programs in terms of mental health itself. And then things like little types of infographics that are not dense and heavy, but give you a lot of statistics that show how this can be supported in the environment. And I think this is one of the most, for me, to see stress and anxiety really understood as a human experience, that it's not something wrong with you, and it's really okay to ask for help. In fact, it's an act of power to say you need help. And so the COVID pandemic really brought this to the surface, and we want to really encourage that aspect of being a positive result about from what COVID came from. So we go on through the site, and first, like I say, it's an awareness and actions toolkit. And so we wanted to take a lot of time really educating around stress in and of itself, and why there is good stress, which is called the eustress, which sometimes it gets us really motivated to meet a deadline in a project, but also there's the bad stress and distress. And it's kind of one of those vicious cycles where you have a stressful event, you get negative thoughts, challenging emotions, you get into that fight, flight, freeze with the amygdala. A lot of you know that term, amygdala hijack. And then we go into those unhealthy behaviors and coping habits that kind of perpetuate the cycle. It just keeps going round and round and round. And without the proper education, we don't really know how to cope with stress in a healthy way. So we give a lot of information about stress in of itself, looking at burnout, a huge study that the Harvard Business Review did regarding the impacts of burnout with a lot of statistics involved. And then breaking down, pardon me, stress in and of itself, and how stress affects us as whole human beings. And we are not just, physical health, we're talking about emotional health, mental and cognitive health, and spiritual health, which is not about religion. It's more about where we find our purpose and meaning in life and how that's influenced by adverse stress. And it has the effects on the physical health, the mental health, the emotional well-being, and of course, when our physical and mental health are affected, we really get into adverse spiritual detrimental health issues, and that even trauma and PTSD are issues that come from a lot of workplace challenges that are not even acknowledged, and so there's a lot of suffering in silence. And so going through this area of information, we also wanted to put a real distinction on the difference between anxiety and stress. And we have a great deal of resources in here. I'm working with anxiety in and of itself, something from the National Center of Complementary and Integrative Health, talking about different ways to look at anxiety. And then we come back up and we break it down into stress. When I began to teach a lot about stress in workplace environments, I came across a book that came out in 1979 by a Carl Albrecht, and it's called Stress and the Manager. You can still get it. And he broke stress up into, I thought was really a healthy way to approach is to see it in terms of aspects of where we could not just lump it into one thing. And he broke down stress into time and attention stress, anticipatory and projection, encounter stress, and situational stress. And so we take some time in the toolkit to educate about that, what time and attention stress is. And there's distracted attention stress. Back in 1979, there wasn't all the stuff that we had that was pulling our attention away, yet it has a real detrimental impact on our ability to focus and our cognitive processes. And hypervigilance, over-focused attention stress. And so we break down that, looking at anticipatory stress. A lot of it is what we call the woulda, coulda, what should I do, the stuff that we do in terms of our heads and thinking about what should have done. And a lot of this is what we call self-created stress. And self-created stress is a lot of what we do inside of ourselves that really make things worse. Things like catastrophizing, the what ifs, exaggerating negatives and positives, mind reading, what we should and shouldn't do. And so what we did for that is I had created an hour class talking about how to deal with these things that we call them mind traps, cognitive distortions. So we walk through a lot of these, and we understand stress and the different levels that it affects us, conscious, unconscious levels of stress. And then coming back into Albrecht's toolkit as well. And what we also wanted to feature within this document is ECI's Workplace Pressure and Retaliation Ethics Survey Review. So we have a link to that to give lots and lots of information. Going from stress itself, this is one thing I was really thrilled, like I said from the beginning, that we were able to talk about, was how some of the stress that is going on is within the workplace culture and leadership itself. And this gets into a real tricky area because we're talking in leadership, we're talking about egos and nobody wanting to say something, but everybody suffering in silence. And what I'm really happy that I was able to put this up, and I mentioned this during the beginning, is the MIT Management Review published in January of this year says toxic culture is driving the Great Resignation. And so what we, consider the elephants in the room that nobody really wants to talk about really needs to be talked about and addressed. And the way that we're approaching it to kind of go past the ego defensive reactions is to bring in those HQP principles and really focus on what a ethical workplace culture is and why these things are important to be adhered to, and to make any reviews in terms of the leadership aspect and the management aspect that might be contributing to the workplace stress, to focus on building a workplace culture of integrity and why all these principles are important. And so that we don't run into a lot of that not walking the talk stuff. But we're seeing, like I said, everywhere we're turning now, everybody wants to learn how to make our organizational culture and leadership a lot more ethical and a place where everybody is heard. And so a lot of great things are happening in that regard. And then I have a little bit, don't want to spend too much time on it, talking about how all of these things were broken down in terms of the elephant in the room. And once again, we go through different pages, giving you just different examples of how these things affect an organization, how they affect employees, how they affect leadership. And another aspect that we think of in terms of the stress in the workplace, which we've been learning a lot about in Speak Up culture, was under diversity, equity, inclusion, and how the stresses of that need to be addressed. Once again, bringing in that culture of integrity. So the toolkit also moves into, well, what can we do to help and feel better? And so not only on the symptoms level, but on the root cause level. And we need to look at those root causes and to find out all those different systems and processes that contribute to workplace stress. So in this section, we go into a whole systems approach. We talk about resistance to change. We bring in Carol Dweck's mindset and a nice video from her to talk about that. And then we talk about things that are ineffective, not grabbing the bull by the horns and all the different stress whack-a-mole programs. We have an area talks about the good and the bad about what's happened with mindfulness education in the workplace, and how to not make everything be a trendy buzzword that we're just not going to really understand what's going on, but bring in a lot of buzzwords. And so the skill sets that we really want to focus upon in terms of what can help our mindfulness skills as a life skill, and how to become more responsive and less reactive. Looking at adaptive leadership that was brought in by Heifetz and Linsky, and we have a lot of information on all of that. A free course that they're doing through Harvard's Harvard X. And of course, what a lot of you know about is psychological safety, how that's an imperative to have an ethical workplace. And we bring in some of the two best experts in this, and a lot of information on psychological safety. And then operational resiliency, which is a new area which we're looking at how the organization, their operational aspects can really be ready before the next crisis hits. And then in the section that I really like, that I hope all of you will love coming to, is what we can do in the moment when we need to calm our stress down. And so we have a lot of healthy self-care practices. And it's real important to remember that healthy self-care is not self-indulgent. And when we bring in that image of in the airplane, putting on your mask and before your child's mask, making sure that you are taking care of yourself and not being burned out. It's really important to do what you can for mind body wellness. And so what we have in here, when you can jump onto the site immediately, you can go to meditation practices that Calwant and I have recorded, body scans, a little bit longer practices. And then for the folks that just have 5 minutes, we can go in and do any of these random practices that just take you back to a place of centeredness and calm. And we have areas on stress and diet, the impacts of that on our health and well-being, music for calming stress, the stress calming benefits of being in nature, and guided self-reflection practices that allow you to go a little bit deeper to, again, we have the mind traps in here, just different types of things that can really build your mindful awareness skill sets as well. And so this was, as you can see, a huge project that we put together, but we were absolutely thrilled that ECI gave us this opportunity to create something that was really unique in terms of a companion that we can actually go, well, we know we need to do this. How can we do this? And this is what the site was really designed to do, just to be a resource for you folks to really be able to come in and benefit from the knowledge, the skills, the practices, what we believe can create a more healthy, ethical culture, and really work this all in together as a really large synergistic process. Now, you probably just were thinking, wow, this is a lot of stuff. And what I'm really excited to let you know about today is that Calwant and I are going to be partnering with ECI and their new communities program with a ready, responsive, and resilient action group that we're going to be offering as a service to our fellow E&C professionals. And we'll be creating a monthly program that explores putting various aspects of the toolkit into action, as well as a weekly guided stress calming and centering meditation practice that we're going to be offering on Fridays, twice a day, once led by Calwant from the UK and one from myself from the US. And that'll give an opportunity for global participation. ECI is putting the finishing touches on the communities program itself, with a projected start date for our group to begin after the Impact Conference. But I think we've got the link in the chat where you can sign up to be notified about the actual dates and times. And then you're also welcome to contact myself and Calwant through the website itself, and that link is also in the chat. And I am back. And I'm going to hand it over to Wendy.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Suzanne. We were so excited to be able to bring you not just the working group paper with a lot of information we hope that you will check out, but also this valuable toolkit. I don't have the results right in front of me, but we actually had our health and wellness doctor speak at a conference last week, and just the number of employees who are being surveyed now who are starting to realize or share that they are still experiencing stress, and maybe even some all new stresses, right, Suzanne, as people are starting to get back together in person. In fact, I'll just share our group, Ethics and Compliance Professionals at Lockheed Martin, got together in person for the first time in a couple of years. And it was interesting that some of the colleagues said, this is almost a different kind of stressor from being in your nest in a home office environment to being back around so many people. So we do have to be sensitive to some of the stresses that we feel and that our employees may be feeling. And I really appreciate that presentation. It was great. Thank you so much. So as we close today and maybe take a couple of questions from you, we hope, or observations you may have, we learned as part of this project that leaders have kind of moved away from so many rules-based to more situationally based messaging. And employees responded very positively to their leadership messaging. It became more we instead of you must. Leaders learn that employees at all levels adapt and they excel actually when giving broader frameworks rather than stricter step-by-step directives that might not have been possible during times of crisis. Leaders who actively thanked their employees were so appreciative of the responses that they got. And we learned that we, as E&C professionals, if we didn't already have that seat at the table, if we were not on that HQP as a maturing or evolving program, we need to get there. We need to develop those relationships and talk about the importance of the lessons learned. So Alyssa tells me we have 3 or 4 questions from the audience. So we are looking forward to hearing from you. Alyssa, do we have those questions? Okay, well, we will propose a couple of observations. We have about 5 minutes, and I did want to let you know that we found that some engagement efforts have changed. Oh, and I'm sorry, Alyssa's directed me to our questions. Let me see. I do not show those, Alyssa. So if you wanted to post those maybe back in the chat, that would be great. We felt like Ernie, as we were putting together a presentation for the ECI fellows, we actually had a breakout session about if you picture a car, was your E&C operation the driver, front seat passenger navigator, or maybe in the back seat? Worse, we hope you weren't in the trunk. And Robin, I was just curious, as we talked about this as we got ready to present, where did you see, organizations, do you think they became more aware of where they were, if not in the driver's seat?
I definitely think so. And I think they added more passengers along the way.
Yes.
we needed more of a complement to what was the usual before. And I think it definitely moved beyond just these are the typical decision makers. There was definitely more of an inclusive environment because we were dealing with things we had never seen before. So there definitely was an intentional shift to bring more people into those discussions. And as you said, it was more about we need to do this versus leaders just saying, you employee base, you must do this. It was just definitely more inclusive.
Exactly. I think we found that too. Suzanne, any thoughts about that, about our roles and having that seat at the table, building those relationships?
Well, I think one of the most important things is that as E&C professionals, we do get educated so that we have the knowledge to bring forth. And just the fact that we're seeing everywhere that everybody wants now in a workplace what we're bringing up, I think that it's kind of elevating our position to be able to be leaders in that area.
I so agree. And, a lot of us, as we start to close, I just want to talk about how we've adapted. Just as some best practices, just as we have learned engagements like what you're seeing here, we've found these great platforms like this one on which to have meetings and share information, and we're learning to adapt to, for example, this is a new platform for all of us today, even though Alyssa was great and we had some practices. Some of you are learning Zoom. Some companies are even switching to Microsoft Teams or something like that. But we've adapted and our employees have to adapt. For example, on interviews, we've done targeted training for our ethics and compliance investigators to teach them interview techniques and different ways to approach it using video. Conference calls, for example. Not that a lot of us weren't already doing phone calls, but that's such an important aspect of what we do now that we've had to adapt maybe some of our ways of doing business. Some companies are seeing a return to work. Some of it's hybrid. Maybe people are at work 2 days a week in a brick and mortar office, and maybe they're working remotely for a couple of more days. So we're seeing some of these phases, which makes this paper, we laughed, the first phase ended for us, right, Robin and Suzanne? And we thought, probably ought to get this paper out. And just as we were about to maybe release it, the second COVID wave actually hit. And we thought maybe that's not by accident. So we took our time to put together a really comprehensive working group paper that we hope you will take some time to check out for us.
And I do think that once again, when we see everywhere we're turning in media that everybody's saying we need to do all these things, how can we do that? And that's why the toolkit just became such a timely piece of this project.
Absolutely. Could not agree with you more. It just became very important. And with that, I believe we're right at time. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you all taking time out of very busy schedules and joining us to present a working group paper we're very excited about, the toolkit that we hope you will use and take advantage of. And it's just been our honor and privilege. If you have never participated in an ECI working group to prepare a document like this, I strongly encourage you to do it. We have just formed, talk about relationships, right? We have formed these wonderful relationships with colleagues from different organizations and walks of life. And we've actually stayed in touch with each other. So looking forward to some of you out there and what you might produce this year. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Wendy, Suzanne, Robin, and Dan, for that presentation. On behalf of ECI, we certainly appreciate your participation in this working group, putting this working group paper together, and continue the conversation. And I think many of us are excited about the toolkit that you mentioned, as well as continuing the conversation. I just want to make an announcement here after this webinar about our Impact Conference, which is next month, April 19th to 22nd. For those of you who do not know, we will be having Lisa Monaco, the Deputy Assistant Attorney General, at our conference, as well as Dan Berkovitz. He is the General Counsel of the SEC, and Francis Ingham. He's the President and CEO of the Public Relations Communications Association. So I just wanted to let everybody know that our Impact Conference is virtual, and I think I posted a chat if everybody could see information here, but we'll certainly follow up with everyone. And for those of you who didn't have a chance to fill out the survey form, we can certainly follow up with you about that, as well as the resources that were posted on this platform. And if you've just joined us or missed any portion of this event, it will be on demand. It's shortly after this. And you can certainly access it at any time. But again, I certainly appreciate Robin, Suzanne, Wendy, and Dan for being a great supporter of ECI. The work that you do is so important. Looking to the continued conversation, and thank you so much. Have a great evening, everyone, or wherever you are. Afternoon.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.